Okay. Let's pray. Put your last set of thinking caps on for the night. So we're going to talk about ethic theories. So let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, I pray you just bless this time as we look at this important issue, and that you would just give us an understanding of what it means just to seek and follow you, and in this important way. In Jesus' name, amen. All right. Can anyone give me a definition of ethics? Study of ethics. Any ideas? No? Okay, good. Then you're in the right session, like I said. If you can't give me an answer, then I will give you an answer. Sweet. So the question is, what is ethics? This is the question that most people ask because they don't know. All right. It is, anybody kind of coming to a conclusion? It is the study of what is right and wrong. Okay. So that is what ethics is. Now, I want to mention that when I'm going through this, I'm going to be interchanging the word morality, study morals, and ethics a lot. And the reason that I wanted to mention that I'll be changing interchanging those words is because you might get a little confused through. They're the same thing, basically. There is a distinction, but it's not big enough that we need to really talk about that, okay? So ethics is what we're going to be studying, the study of morality. So we're going to be looking at the predominant views of morality, what is right and wrong. And this session is really important to listen to watch, whatever, for the last 3 high school cafe nights that we'll have, okay? Because those other topics that we're going to be talking about will help you, this topic will help you determine how to navigate the information in the other 3, okay? All right, so we're going to be looking at different types of morality, and the first type of morality that we're going to be looking at is absolute morality, okay? Absolute morality. What is absolute morality? Well, it's this, is that we all have an internal sense of morality that is transcendent of culture and the individual, okay? Does that make sense? So it is a morality that is outside an individual or a culture, okay? Absolute morality. Absolute morality is what most theists believe, okay? I'm not going to say all theists, but when I mean theists, I mean people who believe in God, okay, of some sort, whether it's Islam, Christianity. They all have their sense of what is right and wrong. And they also have their own consequences and punishments for going against what is right or what's wrong. Okay, so the first type of ethic theories is absolute morality. It's the one that makes the most sense. I'm not going to argue for absolute morality. Instead, I would say that we all know that there's a right and wrong. Every person that you talk to knows there's a right and wrong. It's inside all of us. We all know that there's absolute morality. Okay. Now, the second ethic theory is the theory of the instinct theory. Now, the instinct theory is this. We have a sense of right and wrong because nature gave it to us. Evolution accounts for our universal moral code. Okay? The argument usually goes something like this, is that humans are a higher evolved species, more intelligent, and therefore to preserve cultures and to become more civilized, we as a race created morality, okay, out of evolution. Sprung out of evolution. It's something in our instinct, okay? It's something inside us that created that. Now, here's the argument against this, all right? Here's the argument against instinct morality, is conflicting urges, okay? All right. So we all have conflicting urges. Which one should we follow, right? Sometimes we want to do things that are bad. Sometimes we want to do things that are good. Sometimes we have the desire to eat a ton of food that makes us sick. Sometimes we don't want to eat at all. You know, our instincts aren't always right on. A lot of times they are on, most of the time we'll find that we're conflicted, right? We want to do something, whether it's, I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where somebody you really don't like, where you feel like, okay, I probably shouldn't hurt them, but I really want to hurt them, right? You've been in that where it's a conflicting urge. So which one do you give into, okay? Preservation. If nature gave us our sense of morality to preserve the human race, then wouldn't certain actions such as rape be right if they help me to pass on my genes to the next generation? Does that make sense? So things like rape shouldn't be considered wrong under this moral view because it's just the preservation of the species and the race. Okay. Now, we all know within ourselves that there are right and wrongs that go beyond preservation. And so this is one of the arguments against the instinct morality. Morality is hard. If it's natural, then why doesn't it just come more natural to us, right? Right? If morals are something that we have evolved into, why is it so challenging for us to follow those morals? Another thing, within the instinct morality is also the concept of looking to the animal kingdom for our morality, right? You don't think that people think this until you start talking about homosexuality, and they'll say there's certain fish or dolphins or whatever that have same-sex partners, and then you say, oh, so you're saying the animal kingdom is a good way to look at our morality. You say, well, should we take the praying mantis, for example, who, mates with its mates and then eats it? Or, is that what we should be doing? Is cannibalism? Using nature as our morality just doesn't make sense, okay? All right, now we're going to be looking at the big one, the relativist theory, okay? We've based a lot of truth quests off this, and this is really important to understand when we're talking about the other moral issues we're going to be talking about in the next 3 nights. The definition of relativism. What is true for you, it's true for you, but not for me. All views and points are equally valid, okay? All points are equally valid, meaning that that's your truth, that's great, but for me it's different, and let's just kind of stick to that, right? The freedom of our day is the freedom to devote ourselves to any values we please on the mere condition that we do not believe them to be true. That is at the heart of relativism. The freedom of our day is the freedom to devote ourselves to any values we please on the mere condition that we do not believe them to be true. Okay, now this is point number 3 of ethic theories, but it's going to have 3, point 3a, point 3b, point 3c, okay? All right, so there's different types of relativism, though. Okay, so point 3a, okay? And that is society does relativism, okay? Now, this is what we would call cultural observation. There's a great book. Let's see. I think it's this one. Yep, there it is. It's called Relativism. Feet Firmly Planted in the Air by Francis J. Beckwith and Greg Kokel. Most of what I'm going through tonight is taken from this book. And they talk a lot about anthropology. You guys ever heard of anthropology? Or you study anthropology? Okay, so if you go to college and you take an anthropology class, it's the study of cultures, okay, the study of man, okay? Anthropology is a study of man. And it specifically will often look at the study of cultures, and this is where the topic of ethics will come up. And you'll find that most anthropology teachers are relativists. And the ways that they'll usually have 2 forms of relativism, and this is one of them. Cultural observation, okay? It goes like this. Every society has different morals, okay? So we look at different societies, they all have different morals. This is their argument here. None is justified in claiming its own brand of morality is correct, okay? That's the next statement. And that, therefore, there is no objective morality nor any moral absolutes, okay? So every culture is different. We see that they do different things. Therefore, there is no absolute morality, okay? Now, here's some arguments against society does relativism. Okay. I liked C.S. Lewis's point and this is, I think, a really valid point, is how different really is each society? How different are we really from each other? And examining that. If anyone will take the trouble to compare the moral teachings of, say, the ancient Egyptians, Babylonians, Hindus, Chinese, Greeks, and Romans, what will really strike him will be how very little they are to each other and to our own. Men have differed as to whether you should have one wife or four, but they have always agreed that you must not simply have any woman you've liked, right? So he talks about that, our morality might have ways of changing in the slight details, but as a whole, there's general truths that most societies all hold together, okay? How does it follow that because each group thinks it's right, therefore no group is correct? How did we ever come to that conclusion? Everyone thinks they're right, they're all saying different things, so therefore everyone's wrong. Not one person's right, okay? The simple fact of disagreement on morality does not lead to the conclusion that there is no moral truth. It's just not good logic. It only shows us different opinions, not that one opinion is correct. The only thing one can safely conclude from anthropology is that people have a different point of view about right and wrong. That's all, nothing more, okay? When you look at anthropology, all you can say is, well, we have different views, okay? It also, it denies objectivity. Every attempt to win an outside standpoint from which to reduce the whole to an absolute philosophy of truth and right based on an unalterable principle is delusion. You're like, okay, I'm not following this one. Yeah, this one's a little bit hard to grasp. Okay. If you are, say, in America, you're in a culture, correct? Right? And you say, as an anthropology teacher, that no society is correct, okay, because they are in those different cultures. You are in a culture, so therefore you are not correct about that statement. Does that make sense? It forces you to no longer, you cannot have any place of judgment on one culture or another once you place yourself within that own statement. There's an example of Raja and the Elephant and the Six Blind Men by Lillian Quigley. And the argument goes like this, is that and they use this in so many books. You'll probably hear it in college. But the story is of six blind men, and they're brought to an elephant, right? And the one man, he's feeling the trunk of the elephant, and he says, the elephant is like a snake, it's long and slender. And then another man goes, no. He goes over to the elephant, and he's touching its leg, and he says, no, it's more like a tree. It's strong. And another one goes to its ears. No, it's more like a fan, and it blows wind. And another one goes to its tusks, and it's like, no, it's sharp like a cactus. And it had all these things. I don't remember the exact details that they gave. But basically it says that they all were in this place of disagreeing with each other. And then a man from the balcony says, you're all wrong. It's not like anything you described, right? Well, people use this to explain that every culture has different beliefs, and therefore no culture is right. But what people have to realize is that there is no man up in the balcony when you are a relativist. We're all the blind men. And so for one blind man to say to another blind man, hey, you don't know what you're talking about, is you have no grounds to stand upon. In order for Sumner to conclude that all morals are illusion, he must escape the illusion himself, okay? He must remove himself from that culture. Does that make sense? Okay? So those are objections to moral relativism that says society does. The second type of morality is society says. We call this conventionalism, all right? Summary is society conformity. Each society has different morals. Every individual should do what's right and what is right in his society. Therefore, there is no object morality, and one society ought not judge another's morality. Okay. So basically, the concept there is that that you should, within your own society, stick to whatever that society says. Okay. So the mass population is what makes right. But technically they're not, because everything is relative. Does that make sense? But but how we live our lives is based upon the general whole. Okay. All right. Argument against society says relativism. Society does not exist, neither does morality. Conventionalism makes it impossible to criticize another society's practices. No matter how bizarre or morally repugnant they may seem to us, if there is no law above society, no external standard, then that society cannot be judged. Okay? The next one is, what culture is primary? What culture is primary? The moral convictions of one religious community may be at odds with the demands of the business community, and which group is primary? How many of you guys have seen that in our culture in America, right? You have people who refuse to serve certain people, and it's hurting one community because they can't get those services, but then it's hurting the community that's rendering the services, right? Because they have different senses of morality, but so which one do you go by, even though there's two cultures within a culture? Because there's subcultures within subcultures, so you can't say that culture is a good way to determine morality. Majority or power? Now I have to go through all of them. Point number 3, majority or power. When you look at the Nuremberg trials, and one of the things that's really interesting about that is, you guys know what those are, the trials for the Nazis after World War II, okay? The generals and stuff that were in that, one of their major arguments against this council was, you have no right to judge our culture. He said, we did not violate any of our values or any of our laws at that time. So you have no right to come into our culture and use your culture to judge our culture, right? So the question is it the majority or is it the power that makes it right in these situations? No, number 4, no immoral laws. You may not like it, but it's the law. It may be the law, but is it moral? In this case, might makes right, okay, under this worldview. When any human court is the highest authority, then morality is reduced to mere power, either power of the government or power of the majority. If courts and laws define what is moral, then neither laws nor governments can be immoral, even in principle. You guys tracking with that? Is the concept, if it's might makes right, and so the law makes right. So if the government changes its laws, it's neither immoral, immoral or moral, okay? Because they are God. They determine what is right and what is wrong. Okay. The next point, I need to fix those slides for next year because now I have to go through all of them. Okay, is this quote by Alistair McGrath that says, "The century gave rise to one of the greatest and most distressing paradoxes of human history, that the greatest intolerance and violence of that century were practiced by those who believe that religion causes intolerance and violence." Okay, it's a little hard to know what he's talking about in context. He's specifically talking about the issue of people saying that religion is responsible for all the injustice we see in the world. But if one of the things that the 20th century taught us is that in these communist nations and these nations that basically had no God and no standard for morality committed some of the most heinous crimes that have ever been committed in human history, right? And he says it's interesting that those people that believed religion was responsible for intolerance were the most intolerant and evil regimes that we ever saw. So that's one of the things he talks about, is might making right. Okay, sweet. Number 5, moral reformation is impossible. To improve a society's moral code means that the society changes its laws and values to more closely approximate an external idea. If no such standard exists, if cultural values are the highest possible law, then there is no way for those standards to be better than what they are at any given moment. A society can abolish apartheid in favor of equality. It can adopt policies of habeas corpus protecting citizens against unjust imprisonment. It can guarantee freedom of speech in the press. But according to this view, no one could ever claim that these are moral improvements, but that society changed its tastes. What? That's pretty powerful. Saying if there is no moral law outside of society, when you, like you gave the example of freedom of speech or something like that, and you're changing these things, it's not getting better, it's just changing. It's just changing. When we're fighting for human rights under this worldview, it's not getting better, it's just changing. Okay? It's just changing. There is no right or wrong standard. You're not getting better at it. I think a good example of this might be if you went to go play the game of baseball, right, and there was no rules, you could run any way out on the bases, and then we decided, hey, let's all run counterclockwise. And they're like, great, it's a change, but it didn't make it better or wrong because there's no outside rules. But if we said, for example, you go out on a t-ball field, right, and you say, okay, the rules of baseball is we run counterclockwise, right? But they didn't know that. The coaches didn't know that in t-ball because they never learned that or something, and everyone's running clockwise, and then someone goes, no, the standard's this. Well, now they have changed their standard to meet the correct standard, right? Does that make sense? But if you just start with there is no standards, no more absolutes, when you make changes, they're not better in any way, they're just changes, okay? So those are the first two types of relativism. The third type of relativism is the one that many people say that they believe in, which is the hardest to believe in. I find that it is the intelligent, educated people that believe in the first two types of relativism, because what they do is they shroud the confusion and a lot of studying of different cultures, right? I say relativism, this next one, is basically what like teenagers say and just the average Joe, in my opinion. I say relativism. Summary, individual relativism. Every person has different morals. That's where it starts off with. Every person's morality is private. Therefore, there is no objective morality nor any moral absolutes, and an individual should not judge another's morality. Okay, so here's the argument against this. It denies moral intuition altogether. I loved what C.S. Lewis said. He said, if nothing is self-evident, nothing can be proved. Okay, it was like one of the hardest things for me to grasp this concept, okay? But basically, C.S. Lewis's point is really powerful right there. He says, if nothing is self-evident, nothing can be proved. Now, in this book, in Relativism, he has a whole chapter on this point. And I was like, this is so hard to understand. What he is saying is this: if there are not truths that are already self-evident, you cannot discover other truths. You have to know truth intuitively, meaning you have to know them without being told. They have to be ingrained in us to discover other truths. Does that make sense? Truths like knowing you exist, truths like relying on your senses, things like that. You have to believe that your eyes are seeing what they are seeing to discover scientific evidence. Does that make sense? There are truths that have to be self-evident, and they go way deeper into this, and it was like, wow, this is really deep. But anyway, when it comes to this point of relativism, it denies moral intuition altogether, is I say relativism talks about that there is let me go back. He said, let's see, the main 3 points are, never mind, I won't go back. But the point is that you don't have, that everyone's morals are different and that it's private, and so there is no moral absolutes. When it comes to about denying moral intuition altogether, the reality is that everybody knows within themselves that there is right and wrong, okay? I say relativism is basically saying no one knows that there's right and wrong within themselves, but that's not true. We must know certain things immediately, directly, in order to have the tools to learn other things. The mind grasps them instantly. I've been talking too much. I can't say any S's right now. And inferential knowledge flows from them. If we always have to give justification for everything we know, knowledge would be impossible because we could never answer an infinite series of questions. You know, when we look at the founders of our country, one of the things they said was that certain truths are self-evident. This justification of morality came within ourselves. It doesn't work out practically, the I say relativism. This is one of maybe C.S. Lewis's most famous quotes ever. Whenever you find a man who says he does not believe in right and wrong, you'll find the same man going back on this a moment later. He may break his promise to you, but if you try breaking one to him, he will be complaining, "It's not fair," before you can say Jack Robinson. It seems then we are forced to believe in a real right and wrong. Okay? You might say that you are a relativist, but the moment that someone goes, "Hey, let me have your stereo," and they're like, "No, I'm not going to give you my stereo." "Why not? I want it. I'm going to take it from you." Like, that's wrong. "Oh, was that what you said is wrong?" "Oh, well, yeah, that's wrong to me." "Well, it's not wrong to me, and so I think I'm just going to impose my morality on you." Okay? So it doesn't work out practically. And you really find it, people who say they're moral relativists, when they're finally there, they are wronged in some way, then they're suddenly standing up for the wrong that has taken place in their lives, right? The sociopath is just as valid as the saint under this view. For to deny the existence of a universally objective moral distinctions, one must admit that Mother Teresa was no more or less moral than Adolf Hitler, that torturing 3-year-olds for fun is neither good nor evil, that giving 10% of one's financial surplus to an invalid is neither praiseworthy nor condemnable, that raping a woman is neither right nor wrong, that providing food and shelter for one's spouse and children is neither a good thing nor a bad thing. Those who deny obvious moral rules, who say that murder and rape are morally benign, that cruelty is not a vice, that that cowardice is a virtue, due to not merely having a different moral point of view, they have something wrong with them. C.S. Lewis said, "We laugh at honor and are shocked to find traitors in our midst. We castrate and bid the gleanings be fruitful." The quintessential relativist is a sociopath with no conscience. This is what relativism produces. Do you guys know what a sociopath is? Does anybody know? What do you mean if I called Joey a sociopath? What am I saying? Yeah, right? We often talk about sociopaths as killers or something like that, but when you really think about it, a relativist is saying that there is no absolute truth, so basically there is no sense of right and wrong, and it's just personal. So basically the deepest relativist is really a sociopath, right? Because for the relativist, they might have good morals within themselves, right? Not killing, not raping, those kind of things, but they can't say anything against somebody else who doesn't have those morals. Does that make sense? Tracking with that? Okay. All right, so let's look at the 7 fatal flaws of moral relativism. If we get our shirts, you might want to pay attention to this part because it's going to be on the back of your shirt, and people are going to be like, "What does that mean?" So here's those points. I feel bad for the junior hires now because they didn't get to go to school this session. Okay, they're like, "I don't know what a relativist is." You shouldn't wear that shirt, kid. Apparently you didn't quest enough for truth. All right, relativists can't accuse others of wrongdoing. Relativism is the ultimate pro-choice position because it legitimizes every personal choice, even the choice to be a racist. This is the first law of relativism. When right or wrong are a matter of personal choice, we surrender the privilege of making moral judgments on others' actions. But if our moral intuition rebels against these consequences of relativism, if we're sure that some of these things might be wrong and some judgments against another's conduct are justified, then relativism is false. Okay? As things are now, everything is up for grabs. Nevertheless, name-palming babies is bad. Starving the poor is wicked. Buying and selling each other is depraved. There is such a thing as evil. Altogether now, says who? God help us. Right? I was listening to William Lane Craig and Greg Koukl on a podcast. It was like just the most wonderful thing. When I saw it, I was like, I'm listening even though it's 2.5 hours long because I love both those men. Anyway, they were talking, and then William Lane Craig had to go, and one of the callers called in because it's a radio program, and he was asking about relativism. And he said, it's interesting. I was having this is Greg Koukl talking. I was having this conversation with I think he calls him Bill. Bill in the car about this, is that you either have to, relativists are faced with a really moral problem because either they have to abandon their ideals or abandon their humanity, right? Because the caller said that he was talking to his friend, and him and his partner had just adopted a son, and he was 2 years old. And he said to him, he goes, for me to take your son and boil him in wax is wrong. But you, as a relativist, you can't say that that's wrong for me, but you can say it's wrong for you. And the guy said, yeah, you're right. That's crazy. That's a sociopath, because they either have to make one or two decisions. They either have to let go of the idea of being a relativist, or they have to adhere to absolute morality to be able to save their humanity. Does that make sense? They kind of have an option when they're faced with an issue like that. And often if you back a relativist into a corner like that, they just find you as fanatical because you're using really rough language to be able to give them an idea of how wrong relativism is. Okay, point number 2. Relativists can't complain about the problem of evil. There is no true evil to discuss, only differing opinions about what is pleasant or unpleasant, desired or not desired. When a relativist doesn't believe in a God who would allow evil and suffering in the world, they have no right to say that, because according to them, there is no such thing as right or wrong. Okay? Point number 3. Relativists can't place blame or accept praise. Okay, they can't blame someone and they can't accept praise because there is no standard of right and wrong. Relativists can't make charges of unfairness or injustice. You guys all know who Nietzsche is, right? The one that said God is dead. You guys, Friedrich Nietzsche. He said, the masses blink and say, we are all equal. Man is but man. Before God, we are all equal. Before God, but now this God has died. The masses blink and say we are all equal. Man is man, but before God, we are all equal. Before God, but now this God is dead. Start reading people who actually believe that God doesn't exist and who have actually come to the conclusion that they have to believe in moral relativism, like Nietzsche, and they realize there's no equality amongst men. There's no reason to defend each other. It's all relative at that point. There is no such thing as injustice anymore. So we are on point number 5. Relativists can't improve their morality. The moment you say that one set of moral ideas can be better than another, you are in fact measuring them by a standard. Saying that one of them conforms to the standard more nearly than the other, you are in fact comparing them both with some real morality, admitting that there's such thing as a real right, independent of what people think, and that some people's ideas get nearer to that real right than others. Okay, like we talked about. If you're a relativist, you can't say there's a better form of morality than another. Okay? Okay, now, I want you to take a break real fast and think about a moral issue that's facing us today, right? let's take two of the big issues that we're going to be talking about over the next couple nights. Abortion, right? For the person that says is pro-choice, they can't argue that the pro-life is any less of a moral position. Does that make sense? Because morality is relative from one person to person, and both are equally as valid. So therefore, why would the relativists fight for personal choice? Or look at the issue of even, I could even think of the issue of homosexuality, right? Fighting for homosexual rights, whether to get married or whatever it might be, there's not a right or a wrong in that situation. So why fight for it if there's not a higher standard? Okay, we're going to be talking about on the third night is that only those who are absolute moralists have how did I word it? Only those who are absolute moralists have the ability to stand up for the homosexual community, not relativists. It's pretty powerful, and we're going to talk about how Christians are the only ones that really can have that position to stand up and any ground to stand upon morally. Okay, so, oh man. Next time I'm going through these slides. Okay, number 6. Relativists can't mold meaningful moral discussions. Ethical discourse involves comparing the merits of one view to another to find which is best. Okay. The only course of action truly consistent with moral relativism is complete silence. If you view all morality as relative and you are consistent, you can't ever make a moral recommendation. This puts the relativists in an unattainable position, caught coming and going. If they speak, they surrender their relativism. If they do not speak, they surrender their humanity. That's pretty crazy. A relativist, the only thing they can do when it comes and be a true relativist is say nothing on morality. Because the moment they say something on morality, they become now an absolute moralist. Okay? Quarreling means trying to show that the other man is wrong, and there would be no sense in trying to do that unless you and he had some agreement as to what right and wrong are, just as there would be no sense in saying that a footballer has committed a foul unless there was some agreement about the rules of football. Okay? Relativists can't promote the obligation of tolerance. Okay? Just like I said before, I talked about that already, so I'm going to keep going. The real reason that people are relativists. Some people will object to this characterization because they wish to keep the label moral regardless of their ethics. How dare you say I have no morality? They protest. I have morality. I do whatever I please. That's my morality. That's our point. Those who are relativists do whatever they want, and doing whatever one wants is not morality. Morality is doing what's right, not necessarily what's pleasant. Okay? The reason that people are relativists is they want to do what they want. Okay? But when everyone does what they want, everyone gets hurt. Okay? When morality is reduced to personal taste, people exchange the moral question, what is good, for the pleasure question, what feels good. They assert their desires and then attempt to rationalize their choices with moral language. That's just the reality of our culture today. So the real reason that people are relativists are because they want to do what they want to do. Relativists realize that they can't live in a world without ethics, so they come up with theories to appease their conscience. Okay? All right, so those are the main ethic theories. We're done with our session, but I want to talk about one more thing that I didn't put in my notes. I was thinking as I was teaching about this one. All right, I'm going to ask you guys a hard question. It's called Plato's urethro dilemma. He talked about it, about the issue with God, and it goes like this. How many of you guys believe that things are right and wrong because God says so? How many of you guys think that? Okay, God said it, it's right and wrong. Okay. How many of you guys would think that if how many of you guys think that there is a moral standard that is higher than God? Anybody think that there's a moral standard higher than God? Okay. Plato laid it out like this, is that basically, and I'm doing this without notes, so let's see if I get this right, is basically on one side, if things are right and wrong just because God said so, then could have God flipped a coin when it came to murder, and depending on if it landed on tails, murder is wrong. If it lands on heads, murder is right. Could he have said, if God wanted to, as God, that murder is okay? How many of you guys think that's possible? No, right? There's this sense that he can't change it, right? We know that God cannot change his morality. So then he is not God, as Plato would put it, because he has to adhere to something that's bigger than himself, if we hold that view. You guys following that? So you got to pick one or the other, kind of, because Plato only gave us two options. This is how we as Christians view the morality that God has given us. Morality does not stem from something that is greater than himself, and it is not something he merely says or has chosen, but something that he is. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Okay? Morality flows out of who he is. That's why faithfulness in a marriage is found, because God is a faithful God. That is why murder is wrong, because God is a God of life. And so therefore, in creation, he wants life, and murder is the end of life. And you could take any moral code and find that it is based out of his character, and that cannot change. When we look at the Old Testament and the morality that changed for the Jews, like dietary laws, that's because those were moralities that did not flow out of his nature. Does that make sense? They're moralities that he said and spoke for a time, for a culture, for a reason, for a physical reason. But the ones that can never change are those ones that stem out of his nature. Like I even think about the issue of homosexuality and why that is wrong. Homosexuality is the desire for the thing that is the same as you, right? The desire of sameness, right? The highest form of sin in God's eyes is pride, self-serving, the love of self. God created man and woman to be different, to love others, and to also reflect different parts of who he is. Okay? So there's all these things that you can look into the character of God, and it would be a really interesting study to think about the character of God and then find where we find the morality in our lives. Okay? So check this out. In C.S. Lewis's book, Mere Christianity, the first couple chapters are just about morality and how it proves that there's a God. I just read this awesome book called The Reason for God. If you ever want to give somebody a book that's somebody who's a non-Christian a book, give them The Reason for God, because he writes it in such a way where it's really easy for a non-believer to be able to read. It's a really good book by Timothy Keller. But in both those books, they talk about the point that you already know there's a God. And the way that we know that we all know inside us that there's a God is that we know there's a right and wrong. We all sense it. And so, you know how I was just talking about how morality flows out of God himself and who he is? And then that we know that there's a right and a wrong. So we're directly connected to God in that way. Does that make sense? You guys tracking with me? Is that God, out of his character, flows morality, right? We intuitively know morality, and through that we intuitively know there's a God. Okay? And that's what C.S. Lewis says in the first few chapters and proves it in such a beautiful way. And I loved Timothy Keller's like, in the one chapter, I think it's like chapter 15, he goes, okay, I'm going to stop. He basically says, I'm going to stop proving to you there's a God. I'm going to say something that you already know. There's a God. You guys all know it, and you've been denying it for a long time. And so that's the reality that everyone's in. So I want you to think about this session and kind of mull it over, because the next 3 sessions will kind of be built upon this foundation. Because you could take any issue and then look at those moral ethic theories and then apply them to any moral issue and be able to get an understanding of where somebody's coming from. And what's cool, even better, is if you're arguing with somebody about abortion or homosexuality, if you just bypass whatever the issue is and go straight to the bigger picture of what they're talking about, it's a lot easier to break down. Relativism is a lot easier to tackle than the issue of homosexuality, to be honest. So, all right, guys. So we have 43 plus. We have an hour and like 3 minutes or something like that. So hour and 13 minutes. Okay, hour and 13 minutes before we're going to take off. So we'll figure out something to do.